talks. And he said, well, ours just said, so long. I think we understand that, right? Okay, I'm having some technical problems here. Sorry, Gord. Technical problems brought to you by... Anyways, I think most of us feel at the end of each month when we're doing our checkbook that there's more money, or there's more month than money left over after payday. And I think this is how most of us feel most of the time, because the world in which we live runs on money. And it seems we never have enough of it. We need more, more, more. And so the way money actually works and having the right perspective on it isn't really an easy thing to always deal with. One day a young mom stopped at the bank and went to the ATM with her little 6-year-old, and so she let her 6-year-old push the buttons on the ATM, and the money came out, and the little girl said, "Look, Mommy, we won! We won!" Well, we kind of wish we had won something, but it isn't the way it works. In my life, I've discovered that rich people are often the object of other people's envy. Ooh, we want to be rich like them. They drive expensive cars. They live in fabulous homes. They wear custom-tailored clothing. They flash expensive jewelry. They travel to exotic places 20 times a year. We sometimes look at them and go, oh, if only I could swap places with them, then my life would be so much happier and so much better. But did you know that having a lot of money isn't all that it's cracked up to be? Think about it. I've got 2 people that I want you to hear from this morning. The first is millionaire H. Ross Perot. He's a billionaire tycoon, and in Fortune magazine, you can go to Shoppers and you can see the magazine there. You can go online. And he said this, I love it. He said, if you get lucky, you make a lot of money. If you go out then and buy lots of stuff, guess what? It's going to break. You've got your biggest, fanciest mansion in the world. It has air conditioning. It has a pool. Just think of all the pumps that are going to go out. Or go to a yacht maintenance yard, he said. Any dock, any place in the world, and nobody is smiling there. And I'll tell you why. Something broke that morning. The generator's out. The diesel engine failed. The sails fell off. The microwave doesn't work. Things just don't mean happiness. Or somebody else we're maybe a little more acquainted with by the name of Brad Pitt, who helps us understand that the American dream is simply that. It's a dream. He said in an interview for Rolling Stone magazine, he said, once you've got everything, then you're just left with yourself. Having lots of money doesn't help you sleep any better, and you don't wake up feeling any better because of it. These 2 men, along with most of us, realize that material wealth never satisfies the deep longing of the soul. We might fantasize about what it would be like to live like the rich and famous. I'm sure we all do. But we need to realize that the unqualified yearning and searching after things is spiritually unhealthy. It's just not good for us. Did you know that Jesus talked about money more than he talked about anything else? Think about it. More than heaven, more than hell, more than having a spiritual life, although it's tied up in the elements of money. That's what he talked about. And when we read about those who are wealthy in the Bible, there's often a sense of condemnation that comes to those and some scorn that comes from the authors of the Word of God. So even Jesus himself, in Luke chapter 6 said this, similar to the verse that was read for the kids this morning. What sorrow awaits you who are rich, for you have only your happiness now. What sorrow awaits you who are fat and prosperous now, for a time of awful hungering awaits you. What sorrow awaits you who laugh now, for your laughing will turn to mourning and to sorrow. So the point of such stinging rebukes of Jesus and others in the Bible isn't to teach us that there's a sin in being rich. No, nor is there any merit in being poor. It is God who gives to certain people. We don't understand why sometimes, but he gives certain people, according to Deuteronomy, the ability to be wealthy. And it is God who sometimes shows his special favor on an individual by giving them an abundance of increase because of their wealth. So someone like Abraham or even Job. And the Bible also declares that poverty is sometimes caused by laziness and forbids actually the church from helping anybody who's in that circumstance. So then what is the main point of what God is trying to teach us about wealth? I think what God is trying to help us understand is that if we are using wealth as our primary resource to feel good about ourselves and to attain something of a better life and an afterlife, it's going to fall. It will crumble. So listen to the words of Solomon in the book of Proverbs, who says this: whoever trusts in his riches will fall. Bing, bang, boom. If you trust in your riches, you're going to fall. This was the gist of what Jesus actually taught when he said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So as we turn into the book of James, chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, which we've already read, we hear James making some points similar to what Jesus said. Often it looks like he's quoting him directly. And it becomes more apparent that James was not criticizing the rich just because they were rich. There's actually a presumption on James's part and a judgment that comes from his lips because these wealthy people had made their money inappropriately and they had used their money selfishly. Riches, I've come to understand, can be a blessing and can be a curse. It's a double-edged sword. It all depends on how those riches are acquired, and it all depends on how those are expended. So someone wiser than me said that you can classify all people economically and spiritually according to 4 major categories. There are those who are poor economically and poor spiritually. That, I would suggest, is most of the world. Secondly, there are those who are rich economically and poor spiritually, which I would suggest is probably most of the rich and famous in our world. Thirdly, there are those who are poor economically and rich spiritually, which I think is probably most of us in this room today. And then fourthly, fourthly, there are those who are rich economically and rich spiritually, which is very few of us, but it does happen. So when I use the term rich and poor, those are 2 interesting words, aren't they? They're actually relative terms. We don't actually know what they mean. For instance, you have $10 in your pocket and you show it to me, and I have $10 in my pocket and I show it to you. But the worth of that money and its value is completely different for you than it is for me. For some of you, $10 is chump change that you throw out every morning before you get into work. because you got a lot of it. And for others of you, it's something you had to go and sell your pop bottles for at the recycle plant just to get that $10 bill, which that's a lot of bottles, by the way. But for some of you, that's what you got to do. It means different. It's the same amount, but it means something different to each of us, rich and poor. Now, we might be thinking that actually, John, none of those terms apply to me. I'm not rich nor am I poor. Or we might be thinking, yeah, I'm one, but in reality, I could actually be mistaken. I might think I'm poor, but in some sense of reality, I could be actually very wealthy. For instance, we might be thinking we're in the poor category. Oh, poor me. And yet, we can't remember the last time that we were significantly hungry or could do nothing about it. It's easy to forget that by just being born in Canada, think about it, we are automatically rich by comparison to how the rest of the world actually lives. Even if we are born in Canada into a poor family, by our Canadian standards, we have access to resources like income assistance, or family allowance, or Canada Pension Plan, or old age security, or community benevolence, and food banks if necessary, and the likes of which the rest of the world can only dream of. Oh, you lucky Canadians. We are. There was this young girl who attended a very exclusive elementary school in Hollywood, California, which is a school that was designed, private school, designed for movie stars and other elites. And the teacher asked her and the rest of the class to write a composition about poverty. So this is how her paper began. She said, "Once there was a poor little girl. Her father was poor. Her mother was poor. Her governess was poor. Her butler and chauffeur were poor. In fact, everybody in the whole house was very, very poor." You see, it's a relative term. Two different people can look at the very same family and one will think, wow, that person's really rich. And another, by comparison, may go, oh, that person's actually very, very poor. And so getting back to the verses of James, we see that James wants to impress two important truths on us. I think, first of all, James wants us to see the ultimate worthlessness of wealth. It really has no worth. Second, James wants us to see the depravity of the soul, which results when a person puts their trust in money and wealth rather than God. So let's dig in. So he helps us look, first of all, at the miseries of materialism. He says, "Look here, you rich people, weep and groan with anguish because all of the terrible trouble ahead of you." Most likely here, James is calling out the culture in which he lives, not the church. At this point, he is speaking to non-Christians. He doesn't call them brothers and sisters. Remember, throughout the Bible, he's been calling them brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters. Here he calls them, "Look here, you rich people." So someone has said, well, if this letter was written to Christians, then why on earth would he be giving a stern rebuke to non-Christian rich people? And the answer is for the precise reason indicated in the verse we just read. The rich are so severely denounced here so that the followers of Jesus are in fact warned against envying them. Don't try to be like them. He is using those who do not know God as the backdrop to what he's about to say. He is saying, in essence, you don't want to be like your unbelieving neighbor. Although life may look good for them on the outside, at the end of the day, don't envy and wish that you had what they have, because there's a boatload of trouble ahead of them. They don't know yet what's coming. The rich may seem comfortable and secure. Their lifestyles may include all the luxuries anyone could ever possibly imagine. But if the non-Christian rich people knew what was ahead of them, they would weep and groan. In verse 5, he then goes on to use a vivid illustration of an animal that is fattened for the day of slaughter. He says, you have spent your years on earth in luxury, satisfying your every desire. You have fattened yourself for the day of slaughter. I don't know what word picture kind of creeps into your mind when you read that, but I'll tell you what comes to my mind. I get this image of a cow or a pig truly pigging out, as it were, at this trough of feed that's been placed in front of them, happy as can be, gorging themselves on the abundance of food that's been set before them. And this fattened, bloated animal thinks that the food is there provided for their enjoyment and for their pleasure. But it's only leading to their demise to become bacon for somebody else's barbecue. That's it. Whatever other calamities that James might be referencing here, it is certain that the destruction of these people in the day of final judgment to stand face to face with God was included in what he is saying. And although money will buy many things, it will not buy a person's eternal spiritual security when he or she stands before the judge of heaven and earth, standing there as naked then as they were when they came into this world, now having to give an account for what they've done in their life and how they have spent the resources that at the end of the day don't belong to them, but belong to who? To God. He's the owner of it all. James then goes on to say this. He says, your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags. Your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth that you were counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. This corroded treasure you have hoarded will testify against you on the day of judgment. In ancient times, in James's time, and it's fairly similar, I think, for our time, wealth fell into three major categories: foodstuffs, expensive apparel, and precious metals. Precious metals. Sorry, Gordon, Doc, I saw your cars in the parking lot today. It's not going to last forever. It will rot or rust. And so James goes on to then address the impermanence of each of these categories. The highly perishable riches of food and grain will rot. Expensive clothes will be eaten by moths. And this precious gold or silver, although it doesn't actually rust, it'll deteriorate in beauty and value until they're consumed. James then concludes that their corrosion would testify against them that you have placed your trust in the wrong things. And then all to this he adds, your flesh will be eaten like fire. That is to bring complete ruin upon those who would put their trust in these things, this stuff, because they had nothing else with which to rely. And so we can see that what James is saying, there's nothing complimentary about this. What awaits those who put their trust in these things will lead to only misery and destruction. You see, that is really the misery of materialism. You think you got something, but it's gone. I don't know how you are. If $10 comes into my hand today, it's pretty much gone by tomorrow. It just is. And then I have to look back and go, really? I didn't really need that. So the miseries of materialism is the first thing that he addresses. The second thing he addresses is the sin of materialism. There's some serious sin that James begins to look at. And so Paul actually helps set this up in his letter to Timothy when he said this, but people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin. I love that word, plunge them in to ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. So James, counterpoint, picks up on that when he says this. Listen, hear the cries of the field workers whom you have cheated of their pay. The cries of those whose harvest your fields have reached their ears of the Lord of heaven's army. You have spent your years on earth in luxury, satisfying your every desire. You have fattened yourself for the day of slaughter. You've condemned and killed innocent people who do not resist you. And so what are the sins that James identifies here? Well, the first sin that James identifies is the sin of injustice. He says, hear the cries of the field workers whom you have cheated of their pay, the cries of those whose harvest your fields have reached the ears of the Lord of heaven's army. The person who agrees to pay another person to do a particular job for him is under condemnation if he doesn't pay that person fairly. Under the law of Moses, an employer was not allowed to hold a poor man's wages past sundown. If you're an employer, you had to make sure you paid your person, your worker, by 6 o'clock every night. You couldn't say, well, I don't have enough today, I'll pay you tomorrow. It doesn't work in God's economy, in his system. Then you think about the prophets Jeremiah and Malachi, who pronounced divine judgment against those who oppressed their hired servants and refused to pay just wages. You see, the person who loves money more and cares only about their own personal self-interests and personal profits ignores the warnings that the Bible places here against those who do injustice to their employees. And therefore, many people are forced to work under unsafe conditions, are forced to accept shamefully low wages, and are forced to suffer other wrongs at the hand of unscrupulous employers. Certainly in Canada, we're grateful for labor movements most of the time, along with federal and provincial laws that have corrected a lot of injustice in our country, but not all of them. Many of the working poor in our country continue to suffer. And those of us who are our employers need to think long and hard about how we are treating our employees. Even if it's just hiring the neighbor kid to cut your lawn or to shovel your snow, make sure you pay them well and honor them and respect them for the work that they've done. It's not your back that's going out. Pay and support them properly. The second sin of materialism that James identifies is selfishness. He says, you have spent your years on earth in luxury, satisfying your every desire. Verse 5 here pictures materialistic people and their desire for luxury and self-indulgent, and they flagrantly forget and ignore the needs of others in order to gratify their own lusts and desires. Oh, Canada, we extol our virtues. We have some shameful things to be worried about. Our culture and our media create the impression that most of us, that real life, if you want to live a really good life, learn how to work less and play more. Isn't that what our culture teaches us? Work less and play more. We think that's the ideal. All of us are urged to think about behaving poorly and badly and selfishly. So let me take you back 120-ish years, actually, 19 years, to 1905. That's long before any of us existed. But in his valedictory address to the Johns Hopkins Hospital, the eminent Canadian physician William Osler, I'm not sure if you heard of him, but he was well known, he expressed at this convocation his conviction that a person works best before the age of 40. That's when their best years are for work. And that by age 60, they should retire. He called the ages between 25 and 40 the 15 golden years of plenty. Workers between the ages 40 and 60 were tolerable, okay, but you're merely uncreative, he said. But after age 60, the average worker was useless and should be put out to pasture. So, what did our government do? This was 1905. 1935, the Canadian government established the official retirement. It's a thing in Canada. We get now at age 65 official pasture status. Isn't that great? Whew. I'm well beyond that. How many games of golf can you actually get in a week? Think about it. Where's life's meaning in that? You see, luxury and ease have been touted as the thing to desire and to go after the most. Focusing and becoming engrossed in the pleasures of this world, we are sold as the good life. It used to be called Freedom 55 for those of you who are in my vintage. Well, no longer is Freedom 55 available to us, friends. It's now Freedom 75. Most of us can't afford to retire. Why? Because we think we've got to have more. Why is it that fewer and fewer people are participating in the life of the church and engaging in collective spiritual practices together? Why is it the churches in Canada and North America are offering alternate worship times other than Sunday morning? I think it's because people are so stressed out from the week, earning their money, managing their debt, raising their families, and overcome with fatigue. Sunday's the only time to sleep in and have a lazy day, a family day. That's what Sunday is now called. It's no longer called the Lord's Day in our culture. It's called the Family Day. Well, there's nothing against family. And the Sabbath was created for us, not the other way around. We understand that. And I know that every day, every hour of every week is sacred time. Sunday's no holier than any other day. But I believe the church has lost its influence to help believers. We're concerned about non-believers, rightfully so. But what we forget is those of us in here, in the church, who have gathered as a church for millennia, since the time of Jesus. Maybe we need to look at ourselves and evaluate what's really important, John, in your life. I must admit, when I go on holidays, I go, maybe I'll just take a Sunday off. Maybe I'll just go to the lake instead. And then I go, no, I need to find a place to worship. I need to find a place to connect with God and others. Friends, we have to look at ourselves first before trying to engage unbelievers and invite them into the life of the church, because if we are not sold out for God and what's important to Him in here, then our influence to engage those out there will suffer. I can guarantee you, align your money and you align your priorities. It's as simple as that. We will always make room for those things that we think are important and of value to us. Always. We all do. So is it important? What am I doing with my time and my money and my gifts for the work of God? Why is it though so few of us visit the sick or attempt to love the lost? Is the reason because, to do that, John, it's going to cut into my leisure time. I'd rather go to the golf course than to go visit somebody, because I need my downtime. I need my me time. I need to focus and regenerate my health. Well, we do need to do those things. I'm not against that. But so often it's just because it's not that important to us. I'd rather go to the golf course, quite frankly. I'm not a golfer, but I'm a gaffer, but sometimes we'd just rather engage in those things that bring us pleasure than to do those things that are going to honor God the most. Our generation is so materialistic that it will, as a rule, always choose the selfish over the spiritual. It always does. Let me give you a sociological perspective on this. Bank of America, I believe it's the second largest bank in the United States of America. It did some research a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, and in their research they discovered that Gen Z is the most materialistic generation today. And you're going, well, John, what on earth is Gen Z? Gen Z are those who are between the ages of 10 and 27. Those between the ages of 10 and 27, they're the most materialistic generation today. And they are much more driven by financial success than millennials. So who are the millennials? Millennials are those aged 28 to 43. And Gen X, which is age 44 to 60. And then the boomers, which is beyond that, me, basically. So according to the Bank of America, Gen Z, between ages of 10 and 27, are 45% more likely to, quote, cite the desire to comfortably afford material items as a motivator to achieving financial success than any other generation. By the way, this generation also reflects the highest mental health concerns in the country. Desire for money and stressed out mental health. Is there a connection here, friends? Our desire and use of money connects to the very core of our well-being, our identity. It really does. So what did Jesus say about that? He's addressing us all. And Jesus said, all too quickly, the message is crowded out by the worries of this life, the lure of wealth, and the desire for other things, so no fruit is produced. Anxiety, depression, and on it goes. There's a third sin that James describes, and it is the sin of murder. James says, you have condemned and killed innocent people who do not resist you. You see, those in James' day who would unjustly deny a person his wages so that they could in turn live selfishly could easily become involved in murder of their worker. And you're going, really? So let me remind you about a story in the Old Testament. There was a king by the name of Ahab, and he murdered Naboth. Why? Because he wanted possession of his beautiful vineyard. Oh, I'll just kill the guy that owns it so that I can have it. Why? Ahab was consumed by his desire for wealth and pleasure. If you've watched enough TV or crime shows, when police are looking for a murderer, what do they say? Follow the money. If you're trying to find who committed the crime, follow the money. Well, that happens every day in Canada. Did you know that? The notorious drug and human trafficking, which makes daily headlines, is nothing less than evil, selfish people willing to kill others for the sake of money. That's it. And then our government goes, well, that's a pretty good gig. Maybe we should get in on that too. And so they're now legitimizing and engaging the same business of safe supply because they want to create clean drugs so that people don't die. But guess what? It's still whether it's clean or dirty, it's still a drug, and the drug is going to take them out. It's going to kill them. We're just legitimizing it, and then the government makes the money. There's an old Jewish saying that says to cheat a poor man and to take away his living is to murder him. To take away the things that are necessary for him and his family to live is to ultimately take his life. And so these are just some of the sins that James associates with materialism: injustice, selfishness, and murder. And just because we may not, and you might be sitting going, well, John, I don't have a lot of money. And John, I'm living on a fixed income. It doesn't mean that we're not materialistic. There are sins that all of us must diligently avoid. So, how do we respond to Jesus today? I'm going to go on a bit of a rant, sorry, but there are religious people in Canada today who are quite concerned about the moral decline in our nation and in our world. Many speak out and rail against things such as drugs and pornography and LGBTQ+ and abortion and human rights and war, but very few, if any, speak out against greed and materialism. Why? That's because it hits too close to home. It's easy to judge something out there than it is to judge something in here. And even governments this week, a bit of a sidebar, but we have seen a government, the state of Louisiana this week, that is now mandating that the 10 Commandments be posted in every school. How stupid is that? Come on, friends. To post this into a public school where people have no relevance or engagement with God, and to expect to put this out and begin to legislate this over the people in which we live, you cannot legislate something without living it first. It's got to be in your own heart, and then you let your life become the living testimony about what God is doing and wants to do in this world. Has history not taught us anything? You cannot legislate this legally, nor should you, nor does the Bible encourage us to, and you cannot legislate the gospel. History, it seems, hasn't taught us much. In relationship to money, it seems that many of us have just accepted covetousness as an inherent part of the Canadian lifestyle. Bring it on. I want more. But this is not acceptable in God's sight. God detests covetousness, and he calls it grievous evil. God's severe response, you remember? God's severe response towards a couple in the New Testament, you remember their names? That he took them out, he killed them. Do you remember who it was? Ananias and Sapphira. And then Paul later commanded that followers of Jesus that in the church of Corinth withdraw from and even refuse to eat with any brother or sister in that church who was covetous. He said, avoid them, have nothing to do with them, because covetousness robs and steals the soul of a person. Once Satan gets us bent on having more than what God intended for us to have, it will kill us. It will take us out. And so the question is, do we really take the sin of greed all that seriously? Friends, we know money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy everything. It can't buy your health and your happiness. It cannot buy you a good name. It cannot buy you trust and respect. It cannot buy you love. I've seen families, sorry, I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I've seen families who continue to give and give and give to their adult children, and it just becomes this ever-ending bank to our kids with no accountability. We do it in the name of love, but it's not love when we're acting codependently towards them. We can't buy love. We can't buy respect. We can't buy a good name. We cannot buy happiness. But one thing money does, it talks. It talks loud. Let me get personal with you and with me. What we do with our money says a lot about our heart and what's in our heart and what is vibrating within this headspace we call the mind. What we do with our money declares what we value, what we love, and who's important to us. And so what does your money and the use of your money say about you? Is the use of your money going to testify against you someday? Is it saying that you are cheating and exploiting others? Is it saying that you are greedy and selfish? Or is it saying that you're compassionate and generous and rich toward God? You really want me to get don't do this, but if you really want me to get personal with you today, show me your monthly bank or credit card statement, and I will have an immediate reflection of what is in your heart. Your spending habits will tell you who you are before God. Did you know that the average household debt load of Canadians, excluding mortgages, is $42,000? That's the average debt load of working Canadians. And on average, as Canadians, we owe nearly $2 for every dollar of disposable income. As tough as economic times may be, we have not yet learned to live within our means. I'm going to invite the worship team to come forward as we prepare to sing our closing song, which will be a song of response to all of this. So make your way. Money talks. It shows me and others around you about what's in your heart. Are you in debt this morning because you have spent your money on your self-interests and self-indulgence or others foolishly? Do you need help to know how to manage your financial resources better? Well, join the club. We're all in this together. Good grief. I'm not preaching at you. I'm one with you because none of us are immune to the temptations and the lure of what money, on one hand, that we have in hand, as well as money that we often borrow at 19% or whatever it is, can buy us. However, the question this morning is, will we let Jesus, will we let James, will we let the other authors of the Word of God begin to instruct us and coach us and help us to not only live within our means, but to be able to act and operate in such a way as that we can be generous in this world? The Corinthian church learned how to do this, and the Bible tells us that they gave and they gave and they gave, and the qualifier is out of their poverty they gave, because they knew who was in charge of the checkbook. It was God and not them. And so let's live in a way, my encouragement for us, that our money says that we love God, and our money says that we will serve others extravagantly with all of our heart. I believe this quote: "Nothing identifies what's in your heart more than how you choose to spend what's in your wallet." They are connected, friends. They are eternally connected. So I have a challenge for you and for me this week. Here's the challenge. Think about this. Identify all of your spending decisions, whether it's going to Tim Hortons for a coffee, or shopping at Superstore or Safeway or wherever you shop, or putting new tires on your, whatever you got to do. But ask yourself this question: will this purchase or use of my money honor God and bless others in the process? Or is it only about me? Will going to Tim Hortons, I'm not saying it's wrong. You need to understand the motivator of what's in your heart. Will this honor God and bless others? Or is it only about me? And so God is about our heart. God has given us the money. Whatever He's put into your hand today, the question is, how will your heart engage that and use that? That's up to you. And so God always gives us a choice, but realize how you engage your money today will be the most significant indicator of your spiritual walk with Jesus in these moments. Every day. It's a spiritual decision. Every day. Will this bring honor and glory to God and bless others? Could be family, friends, whatever, neighbors. Or is this just about me? My self-interests? Because if it's just about you, realize what James said at the beginning of our time. It's all going to go up in smoke. And we're going to have to stand before God one day and give an account to him. And so these are difficult words, hard words, but words that Jesus wants to nail down, help us nail down, so that we can have a heart that reflects his. And so I'm going to invite us to stand together as we sing. And this is a song I think we all know, or I trust we know. But maybe this is a part where we also have to give room for some confession and go, Jesus, my heart's not where it should be because my money's not where it should be. And I need to realign my financial priorities in order to have a heart that more fully reflects who you are as Lord of my life. Is he Lord of your life? Because if you declare that he's Lord of your life, then that means he's also Lord of your wallet. It's as simple as that. And so what are you prepared to give him today? And so maybe there's a place for some confession. Maybe there's a need to just go, Lord Jesus, I humbly resubmit myself to you, and I make my declaration that, Lord, with all my heart, not 3/4 of it, all my heart, I worship you. And so may your worship be pure and beautiful before him as we sing.